we should have a hacker hall of fame. That is my hot take. The people need to know. We need kids to think about Carmack the way that folks still think about Michael Jordan. We should have branded shoe deals.
Branded keyboards.
Hello, and welcome to Artificial Developer Intelligence, a conversational podcast where two software engineers navigate the ever-changing AI-enabled software engineering landscape. We are your study buddies who uses AI every day at work, and sometimes we even read a few AI papers at night. I'm Shimin Zhang, and with me today is my co-host, Dan. He comes in both instant and thinking modes. Lasky, Dan, how was your weekend?
It was all right. I survived some kind of brutally cold temperatures along with, I feel like, maybe a third of the country. And yeah, very excited that it's like almost 40 degrees today. Feels like I should be on a beach somewhere or something. So
yeah, we have 55 miles per hour winds here in Washington. So I may lose power at some point during this recording.
Lovely. Well, through the magic of the internet.
So this week, we have a few news items on the news thread mail. We have the latest GPT 5.2 model. We have the news that Claude Code is coming to Slack. We have Mistral AI's latest AI coding model and MindEval, a new framework to measure large language models' clinical competence. After that, we have
Technique Corner. So we're going to be looking at actually a couple things this week. We have an article entitled AI Should Only Run as Fast as We Can Catch Up. We have useful patterns for building HTML tools. And then we have a kind of interesting Hacker News discussion about how can I get better at using AI for programming. And then after that, we're actually going to do a rare one that we don't do all the time.
Right. We have Vibe and Tail, where Dan uses Gemini seriously and is surprised by how good Gemini is. Followed by...
Yeah, we're going to follow that up with the deep dive. We have two deep dives this week. So first is, despite its title, this is actually not an Anthropic article, believe it or not. Claude Agent Skills, a first principles deep dive. And then second, we're going to have generative UI. LLMs are effective UI generators.
And then comes my favorite segment, Dan's rant, where Dan is going to rant about something. And maybe I have a mini rant afterwards. We'll see.
All right. And then finally, we have 2 minutes to midnight, which is where we decide authoritatively how close are we to the AI bubble bursting, popping, floating up into the sky.
All right. Well, let's get started. Our first article this week is coming from, well, OpenAI, but also from MacRumors. OpenAI released I'm not sure if it's long anticipated, but it's certainly a new model. The GPT 5.2 model comes pretty quick in the heels of 5.1 and about a week after the OpenAI Code Red news where they've been freaking out. So this new model has pretty strong benchmark results. I think at this point, we're looking at incremental improvement on our state-of-the-art large lab models. And GPT 5.2 is slightly more expensive and comes in both instant and thinking modes. So kind of similar to the idea of tuning how much thinking the model is supposed to do. And the model also has a knowledge cutoff date of August 31st, 2025. And that's pretty significant because 5.1 and 5 both had September 30th, 2024 as its knowledge cutoff date. So I don't know if you heard this, but there were rumors that OpenAI had not had success training a new foundation model since 2024.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that.
Hence the code red. They were like, we haven't trained anything new. But it does look like 5.2 is probably a new foundation model that they released quickly.
Although there is quite a bit that can go wrong in training, especially at that scale too. Like, it's crazy how much like hardware failure impacts a run for a training model, and like how many GPUs you lose during a training run at that scale. It's just like, it's pretty wild. I don't know if that's still going to be the case with Blackwell stuff, because I think they're water cooled now, but at least on the air cooled ones, it was pretty fascinating. The other thing I found really interesting, but like reading the official OpenAI press release for this was how much they they really stress in the language about the economic value that 5.2 will be creating. They're like, it's much better at doing things like spreadsheets and other economically valuable, like they actually use the words like economically valuable tasks in there. And so I actually went back and reread the releases for 5.1 and 4.5 to see if they were including that language in there, and they weren't. So I was like, that's interesting.
Huh.
Like maybe that was part of the code red. I don't know. But yeah, in any case, benchmarks look pretty cool.
Yeah, they're really trying to maybe pivot towards making that money. Either that, or they're trying to declare that they've reached AGI, as we spoke about.
Which they have a financial incentive to do. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah, so we also had a little snippet news. It's not super interesting, but that Claude Code is coming to Slack. So the gist of this is basically, I mean, you've already probably by this point, heard of or at least used Claude Code, right? Which is like the command line CLI application you can use. Recently, Anthropic has included the desktop application as well. So now there's like a little tab for Claude Code. And that one's kind of funky, at least in my experience, because you have to essentially give it access to GitHub, and then it'll run an agent in their infrastructure for you. So now this is sort of riffing on that even, and you can actually spin up a task from like @Claude in Slack, and it will look at the conversation and attempt to figure out what code base you're talking about from the conversation, and then spin up an agent in that code base and do whatever based on the context of the thread. So kind of interesting maybe for something where like you find an issue and you want to just like spin it up and have it crank on it in the background, and you don't want to like retype all that context, into a nice like job description for Claude.
Right.
So I don't know that it's like revolutionary, but it's fascinating to see Anthropic thinking about workflow in this way. And then also really Slack kind of like trying to position itself as like a workflow tool where like you can use this kind of tooling in there. So again, not as earth shaking as some of the model announcements we've been talking about, but it's interesting just to see how it's, folks are jockeying for position, so to speak.
Yeah, this changes Slack's total addressable market, right? It goes from in-team communication to almost a Jira, like everything about your project is going to live in Slack from now on. I think it's also really interesting that the IDE is designed for a user to navigate the code base and read the code, obviously. Right. Whereas to go from the IDE to Slack means you no longer care what the code output is, because Slack is clearly not the best way to explore a code base. This is kind of the continuation of our spec-driven development talk. We're moving everything to the spec as opposed to... But there's not even a spec. Nothing is saved. It's in the cloud.
Although the one thing that Slack is, when you really think about it, is a massive set of existing like business context, right?
Yep.
So it is actually pretty valuable from that perspective of like, because you probably already, if you ran into that bug in the first place, it came in from somewhere. And then whoever brings it to the attention of the team is probably saying like, oh, is this a bug or not? And then there's like a little bit of conversation about it. And then, you know what I mean? So there's like a fair amount of like actual guts in there already that are very useful for all that. So
yeah. And next up, we have Mistral with their new model. I don't think we talked about this on the show. Mistral is a France-based frontier lab. They are known to release open-weighted models, despite also trying to, of course, create revenue from selling services.
Hosting it themselves.
Yeah. So they released the Mistral 3 family of open-weighted models recently, and they released Devstral 2, a new generation of its AI model designed for coding. This is coming from TechCrunch. Mistral is also trying to get into the vibe coding space with the release of LeChat, which I think is a great name for a CLI-based coding assistant. And I'm trying to see, their latest model is around 120 billion parameters. And they are shipping all their models under a, I think, modified MIT. So fairly open for commercial purposes.
And you can download the weights and just run it. Assuming you got enough
Right.
hardware. We talked about that previously.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that almost every single national champion models outside the US is going with an open weight strategy, whereas in the US, most frontier labs are using closed source models.
Yep.
But I'm excited to see where Mistral goes. I'm rooting for them.
Yeah, I haven't really used their open weight stuff extensively, but I am pretty curious to try out Devstral too, because I have a pretty beastly machine to run stuff like that now, where I feel like maybe it would actually be usable at fast enough speeds that I could realistically use it in something like an agent workflow. But be interesting to kind of, if we ever do make our benchmarking thing that we were talking about in the last episode, to compare it, because otherwise it's just me looking at it going like, is this better? Is this worse? I don't know.
Right. The benchmark performances are, I think, slightly below the Anthropic and OpenAI.
But you're not sending all your data to the cloud, because
right.
it's just other people's computers, man.
Can't trust other people's computers ever. But speaking of our own benchmarks.
Yeah. So if you recall from last week's episode, and if you don't, please go listen to it because it was a pretty amazing one. We talked about a paper where they'd run a series of sort of like
psychometric evaluation.
Yes, thank you. That's a good word. I was looking like, what is it? Psychometric evaluations on LMs to basically see what their mental problems were, which is kind of fun. So now we have the flip side of that, which is Sword Health in the PR newsroom is introducing MindEval, which is a new framework. So it's just yet another benchmarking framework to measure LLM clinical competency as a therapist, essentially. So I thought that was kind of funny because like people are certainly using this stuff for mental health purposes. So it'll be like actually kind of fascinating to see, how does this play out over time and or like if this is taken seriously as a benchmark.
Yeah. And according to them, their benchmark is using LLM as a judge to see how closely the model output matches that of a human therapist. So there's some ground truthing going on there. I'm looking forward to seeing this, and also looking forward to maybe finally follow the crowd and use AI
as a therapist.
Some cheap therapy.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's true. All you pay for is the tokens.
Yeah, that's much cheaper. Actually, I don't know. I've never really had to pay for therapy before. Okay, on to the technique corner, where first thing we got this week is an article called AI Should Only Run as Fast as We Can Catch Up. This is from higash.blog, and I really found this article, this blog post insightful because it talks about something that I think is not talked enough about in the industry. Assuming you are still looking at the code as a software developer to ensure that the AI works reliably, then the verification of the code generated becomes a bottleneck. And he here has this interesting equation of verification being a function of learning over creation. So of course, the faster you learn, the quicker you can verify. But also the more that the model can create, the slower you will be able to verify the code that it generates. So this kind of helps us to think about what future tools could use, as well as kind of how our workflow would change. Right? So for example, if verification is visual and instantaneous, then we are much better at processing visual information, and then we can verify much faster because the learning rate goes up. Whereas with text, it is going to be much slower, especially if the code changes, multiple sections in your code base. And lastly, verification debt is scarier than tech debt. I'm not sure I 100% agree with that, but it's at least as scary as tech debt. Right?
Yeah, I feel like the consequences there are a little bit shorter term than tech.
Right.
Like if you just YOLO'd some code into production, it might be why US East went down. Who knows?
Wow, I can't wait to find out why US East went down. That was a week ago. Yeah.
The other thing that I thought interesting about that too is that they, talking about not only is like models improve, like taking bigger swaths, but also like they're creating bigger swaths at a time, right? So like it'll just spit out an entire file and jump to the next one before you even really had a chance to like read the first one if you wanted to. And as that rate continues to increase too. I think that's kind of what they're talking about, I guess, in this, but also just like, I'm astonished how it just kind of like one-shots an entire file these days, and it used to be, you'd be more like doing inline edits where you were like watching individual pieces come and go. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. And it reminds me of a rant from a couple of weeks ago, right? Which is that what is the most important thing? Your time, and verification takes a lot of time.
Yeah, verification is absolutely my bottleneck in my day-to-day workflow right now. So, but one thing that is actually really hard to verify and that the model is really good at generating are single page HTML documents with inline JavaScript and CSS.
Yeah, so I found this article kind of interesting. It's from Simon Willison's, right? So he's around quite a bit as a big proponent of LM stuff. And this is actually a single article in what I believe is a multi-part series from his. I'm not like a regular reader of his blog, but he even like publishes like a set of tools that are generated by LLMs. So it's kind of cool. And like, I hadn't really considered doing something like this, which is the main reason why I wanted to bring it up. So like, a lot of what I've been using LLMs for just in my personal workflow are like typically like some sort of either shell script or Node.js or even little simple Go programs sometimes to like solve a one-off thing. But it's never, despite being primarily a UI developer, it never occurred to me to like make self-contained web pages as tools that can do like one thing well and do it really quickly using an LLM. So he had a couple of examples of ones that he's created. So he made SVG render, which renders SVG code to JPEG or PNG, which is kind of cool. PyPy changelog, which lets you generate and copy to clipboard diffs from PyPy package releases. Kind of cool if you're a Python guy. And then like Blue Sky thread, which provides a nested view of a Blue Sky thread. So kind of cool. But I just thought, not a super in-depth article, but like we talk a lot about like different ways to like leverage LLMs for personal glory on the show. And I thought that was a sort of innovative one that I hadn't really personally thought of. I'm sure maybe other people have, but yeah, so I thought we'd cover it.
Yeah, I found it really good at creating these one-shot simple HTML tools. Like I think I mentioned this last week. I was creating a tool to render a PNG in the browser so I can draw masks over it. And that's just something that is really one-off, but you can get a tool to read everything in your directory and generate a searchable, filterable way to navigate those PNG files, and then just use your mouse.
Nice.
I think it's great at these like very targeted paper cut problems that is easy to encapsulate. And the best part is you don't have to read it. It just works.
Because the tool, it either works the way you want it to or you didn't. And if it doesn't, write a new one.
Right.
Code is free. Yeah. So third thing we wanted to go over on Technique Corner this week is really, it was a discussion thread that showed up on Hacker News this week that was kind of interesting in some ways because of the debate that it spawned, but also because of people's opinions that were kind of being publicly espoused in the Hacker News thread. So it was Ask HN, how can I get better at using AI for programming? So the author's saying, I've been working on a personal project, rewriting an old jQuery to Django project into SvelteKit. It seems like this would be a great use for AI-assisted programming, but I've failed to use it effectively. At most, I can only get Claude code to recreate some slightly less spaghetti code in Svelte. Simple prompting just isn't able to get AI's code quality within 90% of what I'd write by hand. Ideally, AI could get its code to something I could review manually in 15 to 20 minutes, which would massively speed up the time spent on this project. Do you guys have tips or suggestions? And the very first post in the Hacker News comments is Boris from the Claude Code team. So he had 3 tips. First was, if there's anything Claude Code tends to get repeatedly wrong, not understand, or spend lots of tokens on, put it in your Claude MD file, which we've heard that before on previous episodes. 2 is use plan mode, press Shift-Tab 2x, go back and forth with Claude until you like the plan, and then let Claude execute, which is also, I feel like, something we've talked about a lot on here, and use beads for extra credit. 3, give the model a way to check its work. For Svelte, considering using the Puppeteer MCP server and tell Claude to check its work in the browser. This is another 2 to 3x. And then 4, of course, because this is all basically an advertisement for Anthropic,
Mm-hmm.
is use Opus 4.5. It's a step change from Sonnet 4.5 and earlier models. I hope that helps. And so the part that I found fascinating was the number of people posting that like Claude MD just gets ignored after 4 to 5 posts, and then this huge debate that got spawned in the comments about whether or not Claude MD is actually used. So there's a whole bunch of back and forth there. But the one takeaway that, I don't think it's like amazing news or anything, but I think that it makes a lot of sense to me, especially given in the context of articles we read previously on here, is that like really context management is super important, and your context, loss or decay starts to happen before you hit the end of the context window. And that's when you'll start seeing like, particularly Claude MD get ignored. And I think that might be causing some of the debate because of like, people aren't super aware about where they are in their context window. You can just be like, it's ignoring me. But yeah, it's ignoring you. And you also loaded 750 MCP servers before you prompted it.
Before you put in even your first token. Yeah. I don't remember if we mentioned this on the call on our last week's show. Dax from Human Layer has a rule of thumb of 40% is when the performance degrades dramatically. Keep your work using 40% or less of the token. And once it hits 40%, start a new chat.
Yeah. It was pretty interesting to see like folks from the Claude Code team commenting on it and, sharing their own maybe less polished best practices in there too.
Yeah, it's good confirmation that we're doing it right. Or maybe not we're doing it right, but we're using Claude Code the same way that someone from a Claude Code team uses it. I also want to point out that this week we're maybe for the first time not going to cover any links from the Anthropic blog.
Amazing.
However,
they're falling down on the job.
Well, no, I was going to say they're doing a little bit of viral marketing, guerrilla marketing here on Hacker News. They managed to sneak their content into the show after all.
Anyway, well done, folks.
They did their best.
So speaking of not Anthropic, we have a little section that we don't always do on the show, but it's Vibe and Tell. And so it's meant to kind of talk to our own experience. On this section of Vibe and Tell, I would like to make an admission to, I guess, you, Shimin, and or the broader internet, which is that I used Gemini seriously this weekend. So 2 things. First, something I'm a little embarrassed about, and I'll just put it on the internet because I have no shame. When we previously talked about Gemini, when their Pro, like 3.1 Pro or whatever came out, I actually wasn't even using it and didn't realize it because I didn't realize how their opt-in process worked. So now I've used it, and what I was using it for was I've been doing that thing that I do, which is work forever on I have several personal websites, and I slowly work on redoing them over time, which is usually, if I'm honest, and I don't think this is a bad thing necessarily, but it's like I use them kind of as a test bed to just play around with new technologies or like things that I might not normally use at work day to day, and like just kind of broaden my technical horizons a little bit. So for this one, I've been working on, I also really think that the web today is pretty boring, which we can save that for a future Dan's rant at some point. So I was trying to make like a really like wild sort of unconventional design for it. So I've been doing a bunch of design stuff by hand and gotten so with it. But just on a whim, I have a mood board of like all these images that I'd pulled together. So I threw them all into Gemini and the mock-ups that I had done for my personal one, and was like, make me just a static HTML page that's like sort of in this vibe. And I was literally stunned by the output. And I think that's largely because I've been such a Claude Code fanboy and like, I'm sorry, Anthropic, I'm sorry. But Claude is just not as good at like multimodal stuff, or like, visuals. Like it did a ridiculously good job of like spitting out something that like had I had to tweak it a bit, but like it had the vibe I was looking for, which I thought was really cool. And like I tried to do that multiple times with Claude and unfortunately gotten nowhere with it. So maybe this is sort of the next phase of my learning experience, which is like, you really should use the best tool for the job, including models, which I know you've been using multiple a lot longer than I have. But so that was my first like really serious experience with Gemini CLI over the weekend.
I wonder if Gemini CLI creates a image first before it codes out the actual site, because Nano Bananas Pro is seriously impressive. I used it to just on a whim today generate a MindEval manuscript version of a diagram that explains how the V6 engine works. And after a couple of prodding, it came up with a really good diagram with like.
I'm very curious to know why you were doing that, but okay.
Inspiration just hits me sometimes. And it has little medieval dragons in the piston, kind of like
for the fire.
Yes, it's so good.
That's
I need
fantastic.
to show it to you. That could be our cover art for this week.
For this episode. In this episode, RB Dragons just in the cylinders.
Super entertaining.
Yeah. Well, props to Gemini. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and they also got the instructions correct. It was first generating random letters, but then I told it to generate actual descriptions of, the parts of the thing that works. I'm doing this because I have no idea how an engine works, Dan. And then it actually spit out some valid to me looking combination of Latin and English to explain what the piston does. It's super impressive.
Interesting. I don't know enough Latin to even make a pithy comment about that, but explodoramus. I don't know. Yeah, that's enough fake Latin for me.
So use Gemini for image generation and use Claude Code for writing code still.
Yeah. That was the other thing I did that I found interesting was I used Gemini, and then when I wanted to drop in and do some more conventional edits, I switched over to Claude in the same file and started because I'm just used to it, and it worked pretty well. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, a very unusual week where we aren't just purely singing Anthropic's praises all week, and we're continuing that into the deep dive section with an article that sounds, well, I guess we're kind of singing Anthropic's praises with the article, but it sounds like something that should be on their blog, hint, hint, but it's not. It is our deep dive where we go into Claude agent skills, a first principles deep dive. So this is by Han Lee, not Han Not Solo. Pretty great blog title. And is not kidding when they say it's a deep dive, because they really tore the entire skills system apart in Claude Code. It's pretty fascinating. So it's really, the article kind of goes a high level through what skills are. So if you haven't used them, skills are the new sort of Anthropic tool that is meant to sort of combat MCP's context leaking problem. And it allows it to have many, 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 many more skills than you could have MCP servers turned on, and then hopefully use them a little bit more intelligently. So at a high level, there's actually a tool call. So there is, akin to MCP, a tool call that's created that basically says use a skill. So that's the very first part of this. There's a tool call piece that invokes skills. Within that tool call, it injects essentially the header from the skills that are tell it what each skill is for all of the skills that you have loaded into context. And then the part that I found truly fascinating is there isn't any kind of deterministic flow that chooses what skill to use. It's actually just a raw inference call. And then once the agent has chosen a skill, it loads the skill tool, which is essentially just a very custom system prompt that tells it what sub tools it has access to. So Git, bash, whatever. And then what, description of the behavior in the prompt. And then the other part that I found kind of interesting is that they actually modify the execution context. So the tool permissions and all those things get updated at runtime based on what the skill has allowed or not allowed in there. And then it also injects two user messages every time you pull up the skill. One is for the user, so it's actually for you to see what it's doing. And then the second one is this huge blob of all the stuff that it needs to actually do the job. So that was kind of the high level overview.
I want to comment on the framework for skills. I think skills makes a lot of sense when it comes to using the jobs to be done framework. right? Because ultimately we have a workflow that has specific jobs that needs to be done. Therefore, injecting specific prompts along with specific tools for those prompts in a new execution context makes a ton of sense compared to MCP, where you just stuff everything in a context and then the LLM has trouble fixing out which ones to use. And also, of course, like you have better segregation that way. A design prompt, a design skill should not have access to, remove directories. That just doesn't make sense
Yeah.
on the surface.
The part I found fascinating too, and I guess one piece I sort of omitted in the run through too, is that there's also like a skill itself consists of 3 chunks, right? So there's like the prompt file. I think there's like a JSON block. Did I remember that correctly? And then there's also like a assets folder where you can have like scripts and stuff for it to actually run. A lot of the official Anthropic ones that's how they're doing all the like manipulating Excel files and stuff like that, is they have scripts that actually do the manipulation, and then it's just like a detailed markdown of how it should do it. But the thing that I found wild is like, because we talked about this a little bit in the context of like you can actually overload skills too, and I had thought that there was more of like an actual like search tool that it was invoking to figure out what skill to invoke. So the fact that it just jams it all together into a big thing makes a lot of sense to me, and it explains why some people have run into problems. So I thought that was pretty cool too.
I think there is a little bit of context management where after the skill invocation happens in a new execution context, only the result is returned to the initial context. So we get a little bit of context management from it as well, which is nice.
But if you're interested in the full deep dive, which I highly recommend, we'll throw it in the show notes after this. They went really deep to the point where it's like reverse engineering some of the actual agent code in Claude Code itself, which I thought was pretty fascinating just to see like how this stuff works. It's like as someone that spends a lot of time in TypeScript and working with tools like this, it's pretty neat to see how other engineers built them and like how much sort of deterministic thinking goes into a very non-deterministic system.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great blog post. Next item on a deep dive is actually, this one is from Gemini. This one is actually a existing Gemini feature. This is coming from Google Research. The paper title is Generative UI LLMs are effective UI generators. What they did here is they compared Gemini generated websites or web apps for visual representation of data to human generated websites for the same set of data. And then they compared the user reception using a ELO score, actually. So the humans are still winning.
Matchmaking.
Yes.
Interesting.
Love to be part of that team. So
team
the human
or team Gemini.
Team human as of right now. Website has an ELO score of 1756 and Gemini has a score of 1710. 40-point difference. I did look through the methodology, and it looks like, so they were using the pagan data set, which is actually a pretty good data set for the kind of random things that folks may want to generate. For example, give me a history of timekeeping. And the natural follow-up question to that would be like, how were the humans chosen? And are these, 10x developers, or are these random folks you grab off of the interwebs?
Yeah, and who's doing the design too? Is it Mr. Tufty or just some random person we found on Dribble?
And also, like, how much time did the humans have? So what they did was they used Upwork, the kind of freelancing site, and gave the human developers a 5-hour time limit for generating the comparison websites. So it's a decent amount of time, right? But I don't think it's the best that humans can do, for example. But we're still winning, so that's good. That's a little bit of job security for the rest of us.
For now.
And I also found the prompt insightful. It is actually a pretty detailed prompt that they've included in the paper itself. It's got stuff like your goal is to build a rich interactive application, not just display static text or basic information. They use research before building the functionality, which makes me think like if I was a human doing this, I'd probably spend like 45 minutes to an hour just kind of researching the history of timekeeping in
To understand
human
it
history.
before you, yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And they have a generator that generates the web page and a couple of helper kind of linter fixer uppers to act as post processors before hitting the browser. It's pretty simple setup. Pretty I think a lot of it comes down to the prompts. And I've actually, to test this out, since Google mentioned that they already had this in Gemini, I asked Gemini earlier today to explain to me how a fish swims. And I used the thinking option, and it did generate for me a little web widget with like kind of swim speed versus drag coefficient, like a little 3D playing kind of interactive demo to help the user learn the lesson, which is quite impressive, I have to say. It took maybe 45 seconds, but it got the job done. Yeah. So I think this is a glimpse into the future of chat interfaces, because a wall of text is never going to be the best way for anyone to learn, right? This is why we don't all read a dictionary in order to become a better writer or reader for that matter. I'm impressed by some of these demos, and I'm looking forward to see where they evolve this.
It'll be interesting too to see if like some of this stuff winds up making its way into more persistent interfaces, right? Because this is neat that they're just kind of throwaway, like, here, learn this thing. I mean, I guess you can come back to them in your session or whatever, but like at the end of the day, it's sort of still a throwaway, ephemeral like experience. But what if you start persisting them too, right? So it's like, this is your personal dashboard that you kind of evolve over time, and like it has like a UX experience that's tailored for exactly like the way you learn or the way you want to consume news or whatever.
Well, that's how I stumbled upon the paper, or it's for a side project, and Gemini pointed me to it. So a little bit of circular marketing going on there. All right.
Good old Google.
My favorite segment, Dan's rant. What are you ranting about this week, Dan?
So at the risk of being a little redundant, because I know I have complained about this in the past, why? And this is, now I can actually include Gemini too, since I've really like given that a hard example usage over the weekend. Why can't we have a simple context indicator that is part of the tool, the agent tool? So one of the things I really like about Klein, like Kleinbot, which is it's a VS Code plugin. I may have standalone stuff too. I'm not sure. I used it as a VS Code plugin. Is they have this great like sort of running context window thing at the top that sort of shows you where you're at in it. How come nobody else has that? Like the worst thing in the world is when you get from Claude that like you've hit, 10% left in your budget, because like realistically, and we sort of discussed this earlier, like you've gone way too far if you've hit that, right?
Yep.
And to some degree you kind of know when you've hit it, but like it would be great, and I think a very useful thing, if we just had like old school like power line, 9K or whatever status bar at the bottom of the tool that's just like, you've used 6% of your context, 7%, 8%, 290. It's just like, why isn't that a thing? I don't know. And the other piece of that I think would be really useful would be like, what if is part of the planning phase that I like to do up front, especially when it's like a bigger chunk of work, which I feel like is when I'm hitting this to begin with, right? You're not hitting this on like, fix this little bug or whatever. Why can't we set the compaction rules up front if you are going to compact? I think that would be kind of neat too, is like part of the plan, or like, given this plan, tell me what you think the compaction rule should be and then set it. It's like, just given how important contexts are, again, I know I've hammered on this before, but like, it's really important. Why don't we have better tools? We need some tools, folks.
Yeah, there's lots of direction we can take with it. You can like use color indicators. You can have a little running summary. So then you kind of know when it's running out of, it's doing a bad job compacting, portions of the previous discussions. So
And
yeah,
the other
lots of
part that's
places we can
odd
go.
is like, particularly in Claude Code, when you do /context or like /stats in Gemini, it's I don't know how they process that, but it seems like it won't actively handle it when the agent is doing something. So there's kind of like if it's doing a bunch of tool calls, for example, it won't actually do your /context thing until after all those complete. Maybe if you're using subagents, it's different or something, but like it drives me a little crazy because then it's also like you really don't have an indicator of while you're at, where you're at while you're doing whatever that process is too. And it could be using a ton of context depending on how big the files are that's reading and everything else. It would be nice to get a little bit more, even if it was approximate, just like an indicator of where you're at.
Yeah. Help the user kind of give that feedback early.
Yeah.
I do want to mention
help
that
themselves.
Yeah, I use Hero CLI at work, and it actually does have a context indicator at the beginning of every single interaction. So another thing that I find really helpful with it is you get to find out exactly how much of the context is being used up from your MCPs to begin with, right? Like we should have full access to that. So like, oh, I added 4 MCPs. Now context usage has gone from 4 to 18%. And maybe
which you can figure that out in Claude, but you do have to do like, /context after you load it. And it does show you what's system prompt, what's context, what's whatever. But that's pretty cool. Kiro's the AWS one, is that right?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. Make it easy for me.
I have not experienced that tool yet. Maybe someday. I'm already running 3 at once. How many more? You have a rant. You're not allowed to have rants. This is my section.
I want to have a little tiny Shimin's rant corner.
Fine. Okay.
And we may even cut this.
We'll allow it this time.
All right. My rant for this week is I have been thinking about the software development industry as a whole. And, you and I both are chronic Hacker News addicts. And
it's true.
I just been thinking about the role of hacker and the hacker ethos that is probably missing in the software development industry as a whole. Like for a young, just graduated engineer, who do they look up to when they think of like, I'm gonna become a great hacker? Like, do they think Mark Zuckerberg? Do they think I'm gonna aspire to be a mid-level manager at one of the FAANG companies and collect my RSUs and then go fire? That's not who I think of when I think of being someone who's good at my craft, good at my job. Like I look back and I think about Peter Norvig, the head scientist at Google for many years, or I think maybe even Bill Gates, right? Like he called it. Definitely was.
Carmack.
But Carmack is huge. But are we losing that ethos of what being a hacker is really about? Are we going away from the kind of hacking AT&T or Bell Labs, long distance, phone freak nature?
Captain Crunch.
Yeah, we should have a hacker hall of fame. That is my hot take. The people need to know. We need kids to think about Carmack the way that folks still think about Michael Jordan. We should have branded shoe deals.
Branded keyboards.
I feel instantly like 20 years older from that rant of like a kids. What's going on with the kids these days? But
well, Claude is their new hacker role model,
right? Or maybe there's no one to look up to because there will be no more jobs. That's also
true.
Possible. But I think role models are important for an industry, and I don't particularly think Sam Altman or Zuck are amazing role models. So
well, they're also largely business people, right? Not like the sort of coder heroes of yore, where they might have been larger than life figures, but they were that way because they had done something that required hands-on keyboard too. I mean, I guess Zuck wrote probably the first couple of versions of Facebook, but like, I wonder how much time he actively spends coding. Maybe more than I think. I don't know.
Yeah, or Richard Stallman, free as in speech, free as in beer, like that kind of gave us our jobs.
Free as
right?
in controversy.
That too. Let's overlook that. Maybe he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I think it will be or Linus. I think it's time to kind of bring some of that cyberpunk hacker ethos back into the software development industry.
It's true. Probably all of the machines running, all of the LLMs out there, all probably running on Linux, right? So
Yeah.
it's like all built on his shoulders, one way or another.
We need to have folk heroes.
It's true.
Okay. Rant over.
It was a good rant. I think we'll keep it. You still owe me $5 though.
What? Why do I owe you $5?
For infringing on the copyrighted Dan's Rants copyright 2000. What year is this? 5, 6? Where are we?
Yeah, a nickel every time I infringe on your copyright.
It's true. Oh, now it's time for my favorite segment, because Dan's Rants is not actually my favorite segment, believe it or not. My favorite segment is 2 Minutes to Midnight, where we look at, in the spirit of the old atomic doomsday clock from the 1950s, 60s, how close are we to the AI bubble bursting? And weirdly, it has been kind of a quiet week this week in terms of bubble news, bubble clues. So we really only have 2 things. So I'm going to kick it off with CoreWeave article from TechCrunch, where CoreWeave CEO defends AI circular deals as working together. So if you don't know, CoreWeave is a AI cloud infrastructure company that, runs a lot of the GPUs that are running all of this stuff. And they're heavily involved in the circular deal making that has been going on, and we've sort of covered in depth in this segment. So there was an interview at the Fortune Brainstorm AI Summit in San Francisco on Tuesday, and CoreWeave's co-founder and CEO, Michael, I'm going to butcher this, I apologize, Michael, Intrator, maybe? Intrator? I don't know. I'm sorry, Michael. He defended his company's performance from critics, noting that it was in the midst of creating a new business model for how cloud computing can be built and run. Their collection of NVIDIA GPUs is so valuable, they borrow against it to help finance their business. So you're implying that if you're charting a new path, you're destined to encounter some bumps along the way. So his take on all of the circular dealing is that's just like the way that we're doing business right now.
Yeah, CoreWeave, the company that I only know because I see their prices jumping around like a meme stock all the time.
Whenever one of these circular deals is announced.
I check CNBC sometimes for the stocks that have moved up and down the most over this past year, and CoreWeave routinely dropped like 14% in a day. This is, I don't know. They seem like a meme stock to me, so I don't know if I take their CEO's word very seriously.
Yeah.
They have an incentive to pump up the stock, is what I'm trying to say.
That's fair.
Yeah, next up we have an article from TechCrunch called OpenAI Boasts Enterprise Wins Days After Internal Code Read on Google Thread. And this is I guess it's based on a release memo from OpenAI about their enterprise usage. The use of custom GPTs, which companies use to codify institutional knowledge into assistants to automate workflows, jumped 19% this year and accounts for 20% of enterprise messages. And that while close to 36% of US businesses are ChatGPT enterprise customers, only 14% is true for Anthropic. I do think that OpenAI does have a bit of a moat because all these companies have decided to create a custom wrapper around GPT with custom knowledge and probably like RAG setups. And according to OpenAI, according to their internal research, participants reported saving 40 to 60 minutes per day with OpenAI's enterprise products. And that they also reported 36% increase in coding-related messages outside of engineering, IT, and research teams. So I think we talk a lot about LLMs for coding, but there is this potentially large iceberg of non-code related enterprise use of AI. And it seems like OpenAI is doing a pretty good job of cornering that market.
And really that sort of like internal knowledge base one is almost like the perfect use case for RAG when you think about it. It's like you get if your company's anything like mine, you have a giant internal wiki that has like
Yep.
the collective knowledge of engineering and, probably 5 or 6 other orgs as well in there. And it's like, search is a decent way to get it, but it doesn't always sort of connect the dots for you. And if you have like a reasonably good LLM, I could see that being really a huge leg up in terms of saving you time, especially if it's like a process oriented thing where you have to jump through steps A through G to be able to get something done. So
adoption is definitely happening, but OpenAI also still has that $1.4 trillion of infrastructure commitment. Is that 19% increase or 19 times increase going to be sufficient to justify that $1 trillion? $1 trillion of investment. That's a question.
But according to CoreWeave, the GPUs are so valuable that you can leverage them for purchasing more GPUs. So maybe.
That was wild. Kind of a lighter news week this week. And I'm feeling pretty okay with the enterprise revenue numbers from OpenAI.
Yeah, to me, it's not even the numbers that matter that much. It's the fact that like it has been so calm. There was sort of like a storm of all these sort of like doomer articles hitting over the past 2 weeks, and then here we are, and there's like barely a blip. So I'm tempted to move it back. I could be persuaded how much.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm thinking 30 seconds to a minute, which is funny because the S&P has been down all week. But
right, that is interesting.
It was at 50 seconds last time. I'm happy to move it to like a minute 30.
All right. Wow. We're feeling very comfortable this week. Okay, let's do it, and we'll see how we fare in a week. That's the cool thing about doing this every week is we get fast feedback loops. My favorite kind.
I'm gonna YOLO like the investors of CoreWeave. I'm gonna meme stock our clock.
That's true. All right.
All
So yeah, there you have it. 2 minutes to midnight. In this case, almost 2 minutes to midnight. 1 minute and 30 seconds to midnight.
We should celebrate when we finally hit 2 minutes to midnight. Yeah, that's the show, folks. Thank you for joining us for our little study session AI catch up this week. If you like the show, if you learned something new, please share the show with a friend. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. It helps people discover the show, and we really appreciate it. If you have a segment idea, a question for us, or a topic you want us to cover, shoot us an email at humans@adipod.ai. We'd love to hear from you. You can find the full show notes, transcripts, and everything else mentioned today at adipod.ai. Thank you again for listening, and we'll catch you in next week's episode. Dan, do you have any final words?
I don't.
In that case, we'll cut it.
It's lovely. Yeah. I don't know.